Well, good morning. Welcome to Youth Sunday, the shenanigans that it is. It's wonderful. I love being able to equip our young people to lead and to serve our congregation. For me, it brings me such joy. And this year's Youth Sunday service is themed around the idea of true north, and it's framed up within the John 14 text that you just heard, specifically Jesus' statement about being the way, the truth, and the life. Now, the inner theologian and careful reader of Scripture that's within me began to immediately study and research, investigate all I could about this passage with all the resources available to me. And I need you to know and trust that I had done my due diligence and was ready to preach on Jesus being the way to true life. I had a lot of fancy turn of phrases that delved deep into what it might have meant for Jesus to make that infamous "I am" statement, which connected him to Yahweh, God of the Israelites. I was ready to dig into the abuse and use of that scripture as a weapon of exclusion. Y'all, it was going to be an amazing and stellar Communion Sunday meditation. And it would have only been like 10 to 12 minutes. So, good news is, it's still only 10 to 12 minutes. However, sadly to say, that's not exactly the sermon that I'm giving this morning. If you're not aware, EJ and I will be moving to Asheville, North Carolina, mid to late next month. We had an opportunity to get closer to home, and with the new addition to our family on the way in December, we felt it was best and important to do so. It's a crazy turn of events, and especially as we gear up for the new leg in our journey, parenthood. However, that is the thing about journeys, which is what we're going to talk about this morning, is that they often lead to places that you do not expect. I've had many journeys in my own life, from St. Simon's Island, Georgia, to Ocean Grove, New Jersey, to Manchester, Tennessee, to the most unexpected place ever in my life, which would be Fort Worth, Texas. This Georgia boy never expected to end up in Fort Worth, Texas. However, though, one of my favorite journeys, ironically, was on a road trip with one of my best friends. His name is Neil Wilkinson. And I didn't plan this, it just worked out that way. It was actually on a road trip to Asheville, North Carolina itself. And we had gone there to celebrate his birthday, and we were getting away in the mountains for about 24 hours. And as we were on our way home, we hit a smattering of traffic that turned I-40 East into a parking lot, which you're used to here if you ever drive on I-35, but you're not used to that on I-40 East heading into Knoxville. That doesn't happen. So we ended up in that parking lot of an interstate, and Neil was trying to be much more patient than I was, very willing to sit in traffic for Lord knows how long. However, I was not. And in Neil's words, I was being a stubborn and impatient American. He's from Northern Ireland. So this stubborn and impatient American convinced Neil to take a detour anyways, because I'm very persistent and I detest traffic. As we wound our way through the countryside roads, we began to gain some elevation, and shortly after was surrounded by forest. Little did we know we had actually entered and were on a U.S. Forest Service road that took us directly through the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. We had no idea. The world around us went from dirt and traffic to a vibrant forest teeming with life. At one point, I actually took over driving, and Neil stood up out of the top of the sunroof. Side note, teenagers, no. As he stood out of the sunroof with his his camera in hand on his phone, he was taking pictures of all the scenery. He was taking pictures of the brief overlooks over the Smokies, all the brooks and streams that we crossed over, the tall trees that surrounded us. And all of a sudden, I was no longer the stubborn, impatient American. I was now his chauffeur and adventure guide through the Great Smoky Mountains. Now, the great part about that is, for me, it actually led us to another road, which truly led us about 15 minutes up the road. Now, that 15 minutes took about 45 minutes to an hour because of the roads we were on, but it got us past our original location, past the traffic, and moving the whole time, which is all I want. That's all I wanted. But that's what's supposed to happen on adventures. What was supposed to be a routine stint down I-40 back to Nashville turned into an unexpected romp through the Great Smoky Mountains. And to this day, actually, I'm not entirely sure we were supposed to be on that road, but we just made it there. And that's a part of life's journey. The unexpected twists and turns that become something more beautiful than you could ever imagine. Something that even when it's the long way around, it's worth it. However, there's something really important I want to talk to you about journeys this morning, and that's navigation. Neil and I were really lucky to have Google Maps on that one, and as we made our way through my persistent impatience. Yet life doesn't exactly provide an app for that. Yet there's something more that life does provide, and that our church and that God provides, that has existed since the foundations of the earth. Because as I said earlier, our theme for this Sunday is True North. True North can be found quite accurately in the night sky by looking towards the star Polaris, which you may know it as the North Star. Polaris is a white supergiant star located about 430 light years away. It's the 48th brightest star in the sky and can be found by locating the Big Dipper, using the stars in the bowl to point towards Polaris. The idea of true north, it lies within 1 degree of the North Pole's axis, hence its name. And in fact, if you actually stand at the North Pole, look straight up, you will see Polaris. Now, the idea of true north and the North Star is not to give you directions for where you're going, but it's to help orient yourself as to what direction you're facing. If you need to go east and you can find north, all you have to do is that, and you can easily figure out what direction you should be walking as long as you locate Polaris. So what does this have to do with Jesus' famous I am statement? Well, in a very real way, Jesus is our Polaris. Even though that sounds cheesy and cliche, it's true. Jesus is our North Star. Think about those 3 qualifying statements that Jesus makes about himself. I am the way is the first one he says. Now, if you've read the New Testament, you know that the ways of Jesus are the ways of life, of love, of peace, hope, and grace. The ways of Jesus are the ways of healing and helping, as well as standing up for others when a stand needs to be made. I am the way, says Jesus. For us, when we're lost, when we're aimless, and we're wondering, remember, I am the way. I am the truth, he says next. He seeks to break down those barriers between people and God. Jesus crumbles harsh, abusive, and destructive theologies that seek to control and take advantage of people that the Pharisees use. Jesus also reveals God in a real and personal way. I am the truth, says Jesus. And when we find ourselves confused and hurt by theologies and ideologies, remember to reorient yourself. Because Jesus says, I am the truth. And then finally, I am the life. Jesus' whole person is an example of what life is meant to be. One lived not for oneself, but for the life of others. His life is spent giving life to others and is glorified in providing everlasting life for all of creation. All of creation. His life is one that brings the living God into focus and includes others in on this open secret. I am the life. And when we find ourselves stumbling because we're stressed and exhausted in this world where it's easy to get stressed and exhausted, remember to reorient yourselves to Jesus, because Jesus says, I am the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's no wonder that no one can come to the Father except through him, because his ways are, in a very real sense, the way to true life, the life that God has desired for all of creation. Jesus is that bright and shining star that orients our journey in life. And when we find ourselves lost or off course, we look to him to reorient ourselves and to remind us of the life that God has called us to live. That journey isn't always straight, and it isn't always what we have planned. In fact, this is that sappy moment where I confess that EJ and I did not plan to leave FUMC this early. I didn't cry at 9:30, and so there's a bunch of these kids I love out here, so hang in there with me for a sec. But FUMC Fort Worth has been home for us. Our friends are here. A job that we both love is here. And Lord have mercy, y'all. Thank you. I need to laugh. People and families that we deeply love and care about are here. And we always expected it to be a lot longer. You know, this is one of those places where EJ and I, after we got married, The first thing we did was join the church. And in fact, a lot of you don't know this, but right down the hall in a workroom, before a board of trustees meeting that I had to pitch a proposal for another renovation in the Justin building, EJ ran in there and said, "Hey, guess what? We're going to have a baby." Cool, I got to go to a trustees meeting. It was right in this church. It's also this church I've watched the youth ministry begin to thrive and see some teenagers transform in front of my eyes into the men and women of God that they're becoming. I've watched families buy into not only what's happening over there in the Justin, but really and truly take a hold of this church that has invested in them and their family. I have been able to see that building begin to fill up and flourish in ways I never imagined. And just last Sunday, I had the joy of watching families light up as they walked through this new space that was created with them in mind. I can tell you the stories, rhythms, schools, and random facts about most of our teenagers in that building, and though I occasionally may forget a name, it's not very often because I do believe in each and every single one of them. And it really is with a heavy heart that this chapter of our journey is ending. But there's good news. I was the hope guy, if you didn't know this in my interview, and so there's always hope, and there's always good news, and that hope and that good news is that our true north remains the same. That my true north remains the same, that yours remains the same, the youth ministry's true north remains the same, and every single youth minister that has the joy and honor of working across the street remains the same. I smile at the thought that we will all orient our lives by the light of Christ in both Texas and North Carolina. I am grateful for my time here, though I'm sad to see it end so early. But I cannot wait to see what God has in store for FUMC Fort Worth, even though it's from a distance. I cannot wait to see the work that this church has to do as each and every Sunday you continuously send each other out to be God's people in the world. Now, as we continue on, may we celebrate the light of Christ together in communion as I invite Mr. Carson Magrita up to lead us in our invitation, confession, and pardon. I love you all. Amen.